Welcome back to Crafting the Madam K Way. So I have my wallet all stitched up. I'm pretty happy with the way the lines turned out. Stitched all the way around. So yeah, I like it. I like that technique they used. I like the way the lime green offsets it. So now the next step is to fix the edges. So I notice how I left the edges raw because I'm going to clean those up, smooth them out, and ideally what's going to happen is when we smooth out these edges, you're not going to be able to tell where the two pieces of leather meet. So the first thing we're going to do is take off the corners very carefully. It's really important to be careful at this part because if you go too far over, you're going to hit the thread. You could shave it down too thin and it could cause the stitching to come out. There's a lot of things that could go wrong here, so just take your time and really just cut this very carefully. Especially on some parts where I happen to stitch way too close to the edge. Now you want the pieces of leather to be as flush with each other as possible. So actually I probably should have started with this. Here you can see this back piece of leather. So I'm gonna just trim off that tiny bit of edge there so that way they are flush together. I'm gonna use my good old rotary cutter. Should probably bring out the new gloves that I just got, but I'm not going to. It's just a tiny bit. When the blade's nice and sharp, you can take off just a tiny, tiny bit. So now it is perfectly flush. So we will go ahead and trim up the other side. It's really important to keep your tools nice and sharp, especially when you're working with very detailed work like this. Okay, so now that those are all trimmed up, I'm going to use my new technique that if you saw in one of my videos, the video that I posted earlier about burnishing, I'm going to go ahead and use that technique for this one and see how it works out. So I'm going to use 1500 grit sandpaper. I'm going to use saddle soap as my burnishing agent, and I'm going to use a wooden burnishing tool. Actually, let's get this one out. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sand the leather down a little bit. Be careful that you're keeping it flat on the leather and that you don't accidentally come off onto the side that you dyed. Don't need to sand it too much or too aggressively. We're going to do this about 3 or 4 times. We'll sand it, we'll spray it, we'll burnish it, we'll repeat. Okay. Rather than put the soap all around it, I'm just going to start with one edge and just do one edge at a time. Get a nice coating on there. And again, remember, it's not about pressure, it's about friction. So you want to Move fast, but don't push down too hard or you'll end up smashing your leather. Okay, that's coming out pretty smooth. See how you can already tell that it's pressed together pretty well. And then, like I said before, even though it's nice and smooth and it doesn't really make sense to sand it, we're going to do that again. We're going to do that at least 3 or 4 times until it is just very shiny, very glass-like, and you cannot at all tell that it's 2 pieces of leather. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while I work on this so you don't have to watch me do this for the next 20 minutes. I said this in another video, but I'll reiterate. Don't rush this step. Take your time. Really make sure that it's nice and smooth, because if you have a really high quality project, the last thing you want to do is brush your finishing touches and have it look cheap on the edges. So a nice smooth edge is really going to be one of those finishing touches that makes a huge difference. Okay, so I will be back in about 20-30 minutes to show you how this looks. Okay, so it took me about a half hour, maybe a little less, but I finished up my edges and they are incredibly smooth. Let's see if you can see it there. Yeah, you can see it pretty well. You can't really see the 2 pieces of leather where they're stuck together. It's really smooth. So if you see that darker green line, that's where they're connected together, but it's completely smooth. So once I dye that, that's going to look really nice. The other finishing touch I'm going to do is just sort of take a flat hammer and just hammer down the thread so it's not sticking up, and that way it has less chance to fray or get snagged on something. And because it's wax thread, it smashes pretty easily. You don't have to hit it too hard. Definitely want to be careful you don't put any hammer marks into the wallet. Okay, and there you have it. The edges are all nice and smooth. The wallet is completely sewed together. So the last thing I have to do is just dye the edges, and then I'll put one more coating of a beeswax finish on it. But before I started sewing it together, I actually had put a Super Sheen, EcoFlow Super Sheen coating onto it. So that gave it a nice little shine and also gave it some waterproofing. So it's not too stiff, but I am going to want to loosen up the pockets a little bit. So as I put the next layer on, I'll, play around with the leather a little bit to soften it up. So if you're interested in watching that, tune into the next video, and I'll show a tutorial on the finishing touches. Okay, as usual, thanks for tuning in and crafting the Madam K way. It may not be the right way, but it's the Madam K way.